The following opinions expressed in this program are that of Noah Waterman and do not reflect those of any other
Guys, that can't be right. Can we try that again?
The following opinions expressed in this program are that of Noah Waterman, his guests, his parents, your uncle, your auntie, your fourth grade teacher, that guy that brings his iguana to the park, the state of Mississippi, the Brian Setzer Orchestra, three babies in a trench coat, you, yes, you, in the red and blue striped polo.
This is the best game of all time.
You remind me of the babe. What babe? The babe with the power. What power? Power of voodoo. Voodoo? You do. Do what? Remind me of the babe. I saw my baby crying hard as babes could cry. What could I do? My baby's love had gone and left my baby blue. Nobody knew what kind of magic spells to use. Slime and snails, or puppy dogs' tails, thunder or lightning. The baby said, welcome to the best game of all time. I'm your boss monster, Noah Waterman, and this is going to be fun because we are continuing our trek into the world of, did I make this game up? That's right, it is part 2, if you remember. Not last episode, but the episode before was part 1, where we all brought games to the table that we remember, but it seems that no one else truly did. However, this time around, we are finally getting to that fourth and final game, the game that Patrick Molloy brought to the table, and I said was so interesting. I thought was so unique that we had to give it its own episode. And that's what we did, and that's what we were doing right here, guys. It is the incredibly unique sci-fi epic Omikron, the Nomad Soul, starring the one, the only, the man, the Duke himself, David Bowie. That's crazy. That's crazy there's a game with David Bowie starring in it. Starring's rough because he's not the lead character, but plays a major role, 2 roles in this game. And we get into that. We get into all that. We get into what makes this game unique, interesting, fun, wacky, weird, insane, however you want to look at it. Very French. It's a very French depiction of sci-fi. We talk a lot about that. A lot of good stuff here. A lot of good stuff with myself, Pat, and of course, Lewie and Tro. The dream team, if you will, talking about these games. It's going to be a lot of fun. It'll be very interesting to see where they land on the list. Speaking of that list, if it's your first time listening, your first time joining us here on the best game of all time, myself and the panelists are going to go ahead and give this game a score between 0 and 10 that we can only use once in perpetuity, meaning that whatever score we use on Omikron the Nomad Soul, we cannot use on any future game. Every game has to be better or worse than a previous game. Exciting stuff. I'm really stoked. I'm not going to delay this anymore. Let's go ahead and check out this episode. This is episode 9. Episode 9. Hard to believe. Episode 9 of the best game of all time. We were just explaining how our friendship with you hinges on how we feel about this game, so we want to apologize ahead of time.
I mean, no, that's fine. I hope it's at least interesting to talk about. That's really all I care about.
Honestly,
if
nothing else, it was an excellent choice for this category. And I think the reason we're giving it its own episode is because it's interesting to talk about, in spite of whatever other feelings I had about playing it.
Yeah. Well, you don't love tank controls, so. Yeah.
I'm going to talk about some tank controls. So. It's basically my version. I had my version of Noah's Ocarina of Time experience playing this with the tank controls, where there's like one particular dated design element that drove me up the wall so much. I got so mad trying to navigate this dumb fetishware city. and just like kept it at the beginning. I almost wish the game had done a thing where at the very beginning it was tank controls because you were like a stranger inhabiting this man's body, and so you're kind of like bumping into walls and like having a hard time moving. And then like after the first couple rooms, it's like you start to get used to it, and then it switches to joystick. I
that actually feels like a very David Cage kind of mechanic you could throw into a game for immersion.
Yeah, it really does.
I mean, on that note, we're all here. I already hit record. Let's jump on in. Friends and folks, welcome the best game of all time. The only podcast that does the unobjectionable, the unchallengeable, nay, dare I say, the uncategorizable task of reviewing, rating, and ranking every game ever made. A sizable goal, to say the least, but one that I take with pride in order to cement opinion into cold, hard facts for myself, for my guests, and across space and time to truly lock in once and for all what is the best game of all time. Of course, this is part 2 of a previous episode, and you can't have a part 2 without a returning cast, so welcome to the podcast, Michael Starman Petrocelli, Louis Major Tom Thomas, and Patrick the Goblin King Molloy. Guys, how's it going?
Excellent.
Ouch.
Doing well.
Been better.
This is what you deserve, sir.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, for those of you following along, episode 7 was a premise we called, Did I Make This Up? Myself, my esteemed guests, brought in a game to the pod that we remember vividly, but no one else seems to have heard of. I brought Plock, Louis brought Daydreaming Davy, and Tro brought Fighter's Destiny. Then there was Pat, who picked a game so intriguing to me, so interesting that I had to make it its own episode. How interesting, you ask? Well, if you Google search David Bowie video game, it pops right up. We are talking about Omikron, the Nomad Soul for PC and Sega Dreamcast. But before our souls get sucked into the conversation by a demon in a video game, yes, that's related, we got a little segment called Get to Know Your Panel. Get to Know Your Panel is a segment to help you, the listener, get to know the voices and opinions behind today's episode. Sometimes it's a question for one person, sometimes it's a question for the group, and this one is for sure for the group. Guys, the world of Omikron is a very of its time depiction of sci-fi. Dark, gritty, chunky buildings, nonsensical attire. But do you have a favorite depiction of the future from that era or older? I'll kick off with myself, and I'll say right now, like, Fifth Element is by far one of my favorites of that kind of like, of the very dated version of sci-fi, of still being very unique, very French sci-fi, kind of like this game in a lot of ways. How about you guys?
I was also going to say Fifth Element for the record.
Also a Frenchman, right? Isn't that this
Yes.
is a French made video game, and that is also a French vision of the future?
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, I loved all the flying cars, the fly, like he gets like Chinese takeout from like a flying ship at one point early on in the movie. Ruby Rod, the whole thing.
Right, the real kind of, even the flight attendants or like the opera house, like both the slums and sort of the lavish environment of it were both. I always thought the movie did a great job and kind of holds up.
I think I'm going to go with Minority Report, which came out 2 years after this.
Okay,
But
I can count that.
It was very accurate to like what I think the future could have looked like, mostly because it did a smart thing, which is like houses still looked like houses. You know, like there were still plenty of things in the background where it's like, yeah, no, that thing has been around for 40 years and it looks of that time, but like people don't throw everything out the window every like 10 years.
Right.
And I thought that was like a smart depiction.
You don't have a huge living room with a couch in like an indent in it, like going around not looking at anything.
Right?
like
it's
in this game.
Yeah, it's not. Oh God. Well, we can talk more about the game in a minute, but like, you know, that's the one thing about future movies. I mean, Fifth Element's beautiful and fun and like interesting, but it's so true that like there's no like nobody ever holds like a pair of scissors or like you know like
there's no tie to the past. I mean, a human is an evolution, if you believe.
It might as well be like an alien world as opposed to like our future. Yeah.
Exactly. It like doesn't incorporate anything. And like, you walk down the street, you see a house that was built in the 30s. You see like you'll be in somebody's place and they'll have like furniture that might have been around since the 80s. Like,
yeah.
And naturally, those things exist a lot longer than in a lot of future movies where they're like, no, we got rid of all of that.
That's kind of my problem with a lot of the Star Wars and Star Trek various projects, because like even though they all end up being released out of chronological order, if you watch in chronological order, there's no tie. Like Phantom Menace and the prequels happened before 4, 5, and 6, but 4, 5, and 6 looks older, so it becomes that kind of issue of like it doesn't feel tied in a way.
The other problem with Star Wars' world building is that the technology is basically always the same, no matter like even if it's like this took place 1,000 years before like the Empire or whatever, and like they're still flying in ships, they're still doing all this stuff. Maybe some of them look a little different, but there's never been any of like, well, how did they get to this point? How did we get to interstellar travel and all
the
that
Death
stuff?
Star is the only new invention.
Well, and ironically, you were saying like it's 1,000 years they've just been flying in ships, which is true. But then like in 20 years time, they went from like the Republic starfighter to the X-Wing, which looks pretty radically different. It's like, I'm pretty sure in the rules that you set up, they would still be flying the same fucking ships, and they would continue to fly those same ships for the next 1,000 years.
Right, unless you made it a plot element that like the rebellion had to redesign like a ship in a different way, maybe because of like the resources they had available or like something to
they did
that
do
effect.
some of that.
All right.
We're
losing the thread a little bit.
No, this isn't
No, this is good stuff.
Excuse me, this is no longer Bigo. This is Star Wars tech analysis. Look at my encyclopedia.
This is our podcast about what's wrong with Star Wars, and while we extrapolate on that, let's make it even worse. like none of this would have been good for the movies. This is most of what episode 2 was. But
that's true.
Also valid. Right. You have to balance that.
I guess for me, actually, it's, one of the many criticisms, spoiler alert, that I'd levy against Omikron is that, like, I'm not a big fan of, like, the dark, like, the sort of, like, post-Blade Runner idea of, like, sci-fi and what those worlds look like. Like, as a kid, I was very much raised more so on, like, I loved all of the old, like the Your House of Tomorrow, like, future idea, or, like, I've watched, like, the Thunderbirds, like, when I was, like, younger, and, like, that, like, that idea of, like, very much just taking, like, family-friendly, like, that Jetsons style of, like, what the future looks like was always, like, much more so my bag. I didn't see Fifth Element until, like, I was, like, much later in my life, ditto Blade Runner, Tron, like, all of that sort of stuff like that. That idea was just never really, wasn't my bag, but but obviously there's a lot of people that it speaks to. So
I feel like if you've been listening to the podcast for a long time, you can start to build a very long list of every time Louis says "I'm not a fan." ... It's happened with Zelda. It happened with me right now. I feel like it really was like beat 'em ups or the Ninja Turtle beat 'em ups. I feel like there's been a couple of things here. This has been like a regular ongoing theme.
We're also playing.
What are you a fan of?
We're also playing as a cop in this game, so I feel like that's important to know.
You're still inhabiting the dead body of a cop. All right, let's be clear. And you're only that cop for a little bit. That's the Nomad Soul part.
That's maybe a spoiler to the amount of time I spend with the game.
Yeah. This is news to me.
Oh damn! All right, oh man, you missed a whole aspect of the game.
Let's get on into it. Of course, we mentioned it. We are talking about Omikron, the Nomad Soul. This little intro might be a little longer than normal because it's the only game we're talking about, and there's a whole lot here to unpack. Omikron, the Nomad Soul is a third-person, somewhat open-world adventure game published by Eidos Interactive and developed by David Cage's studio, Quantic Dreams, the same mind and studio behind Heavy Rain, Detroit Become Human, and Beyond Two Souls. The game follows you, yes, you, the player, who inhabits the soul of Kale, a police officer in the video game you are playing, to investigate a string of serial killings which unravels into the dark, demonic machinations behind the city. David Cage began writing this game in 1994 after 15 years as a composer himself, working on Time Cop, Hardline, and Cheese Catastrophe, starring Speedy Gonzalez. but was told the game was technically impossible. Turns out they were only half right. So he hired his friends to make a demo that's eventually sold to Eidos Interactive on the premise. He wanted a movie-like experience, mixing multiple genres, although Eidos forced the first-person shooting aspect onto the game, and wanted a movie-worthy soundtrack to go with it. He had a short list of names he wanted to work with, and towards the top was the icon himself, David Bowie, who apparently liked the idea enough that instead of lending his music library, he composed 10 original tracks and portrayed 2 characters in the game. The lead singer of the band whose concerts you see all over Omikron, and the virtual being Boz. The game got love for its graphics, story, soundtrack, and the reincarnation mechanic, but disjointed playstyles and poor controls held it back. It's the epitome of A for effort. A sequel was planned for the PC, PS3, and Xbox 360, but never released. Patrick, before we all get into our thoughts, you're the one who brought this game. What is your history? What are your memories with Omikron the Nomad Soul?
So, huge David Bowie fan. Something that I never forgave my mother for was that she won tickets to see David Bowie when I was 3 years old and didn't take me. Now, understanding that I was a child at the time, she took another adult, but still, I was still hurt.
Right.
And so
this is up there with the Super Nintendo Sega Genesis fiasco, right?
You know it. You know it. So I went to Babbage's at our local mall, and I saw the PC copy of Omikron with David Bowie's face on the front of it. Begged my parents to get it for me. We got it. I got it home. It was a laborious task to get it installed on my PC because when I was a kid with a PC gaming, like you had to get the right DirectX, you had to make sure you had the right graphics card. It was such a headache. Got it running, and I felt like it was just so huge. Like the city felt gigantic. The fact that you had fighting game elements and first-person shooter elements and like third person walking around the city and investigating and like light role-playing stuff. It felt like such a massive game to me, and I fell in love with it. I never beat it when I was a kid. I also then later, when I got a Dreamcast from Blockbuster when we worked there, I got it for Dreamcast and like messed around with it on that. So I have 2 copies of this game, and yeah, I don't know. I just the David Bowie of it all is what like drew me in, and then it just felt. It felt like it had a lot more open to it than it actually did. Now playing as an adult, I'm like, okay, well, these dialogue choices are actually just questions to get answers to things. I liked that there was like voice acting and stuff in it. The movie element, the fact that like that's what he was going for, it like worked on 12-year-old or 13-year-old me, but it fell short in a lot of ways. A for effort, I think, is probably the best way to put this, and it's all the feelings that I have about it.
And I'll be honest with you, when I first turned this on, when I was still planning on having this be part of the previous episode, like even now as an adult, the opening sequence from when the character asks you personally to come into the game through the actual like David Bowie title screen and getting and walking into the city, like I got a little bit of that having not played this before. Like there was an element of that kind of like, oh, this really feels like the 2000 version of Anything Is Possible in a video game.
Yeah.
So before we get into, Patrick, how you feel about it now, coming back to it, let's hear from our newcomers. Michael and Louie, what are your thoughts on this game? Let's start top level, and then we'll start diving into the nitty gritty of everything. Actually, no, before we do that, I'm going out of order. I want to hear, how far did everyone get in this game?
On this playthrough, I only got to like the shootout at the convenience store. Like you're like hunting down. I never got out of Kale's body on this playthrough, but I did then go and watch videos so that I could like remember. I also fell into a Wikipedia hole and read about all of the characters that you could inhabit. But yeah, I did the investigation and like got in about that far before I was like, oh, I need to watch videos because it's taking me too long to get into this. I put in like 2 hours, I think.
All right, Louie?
I got to like the police precinct. So that like as far as I got into it, I can't tell you how long like I spent just kind of like putzing around and figuring things out, because my thought was, I was like, this is an adventure game, so part of it needs to be like this immersive. I could have just looked up like where to go or like how to get through things, but I really felt like to engage with the game properly, like I needed to learn the system myself. So that took up a considerable chunk of time. So yeah, I went to like Kale's apartment, and then like partway through the police precinct, I was like, I'm going to see what happens further on this game by now watching other people play it. and honestly, like looking at like a long play was far more enjoyable than than actually playing the game was for me. But yeah, truly did not get that far.
Lou, did you at least get to play any of the like hand-to-hand or first-person stuff?
Yeah, so yeah, I fought the virtual, like the training person like in Europe. I did do that, and then when I watched videos of the first-person like shooting parts happen, I was thankful that was not a thing that I experienced personally.
Yeah, if I had gotten to that point, that is 100% where I would have jumped ship, because good lord, the look sensitivity on that. Even watching the Let's Play, I was like, oh my god, I gotta look away. I can't handle this.
Yeah. There's so many people talking about how they'd be like, I'm barely tapping like the controller right now, and it would be wide swings. Like,
yeah, it definitely feels like the first person in the Jurassic Park Super Nintendo game. It very much was like, let's take like Doom elements, but not have any of the like Doom sensibility behind it. I do agree with that. I don't remember being that frustrated with it when I was a kid, but it did bug me this time.
I will say though, like in a sort of like a top line way, like I can understand like with no knowledge of like what the future is going to be like, or what like an idea, like not having like the vocabulary of what like really good gaming looks like. I see the picking this game up and feeling like, you know, this idea of like the limitless, right? Like kind of like in front. I totally understand where that comes from, but you know, now with everything else that has come after it, it is like next to impossible for me to say like that. Like playing it now is an enjoyable experience.
Well, yeah, I will say it's funny having played all those, you know, aspects of the game firsthand. It's like it does it all better than you'd expect a game that shoehorns those things in. Like if you hear a game is like we'll have fighting game elements, we'll have first person shooter elements, you expect them to be like all of them are half-assed. But to be perfectly honest, all of these were like 3/4 assed. Like were better than I would expect them when shoehorned into a game, even if they still weren't, you know, that well playable. Troy, I still want to hear from you how far you got in the game.
I basically got about as far as Louis did. I think I got a little bit into investigating that first major case, and I like went to her apartment and then like looked around and did that stuff. And then I don't know, I wandered into a bar and got almost shot to death by the bartender. And then
was it the same guy from Daydream and Davy?
yeah, it was the same thing. And I was given a sheriff's badge and told I had to go to the bank. I definitely wandered around a lot, kind of like you did, Louis. I think just taking it in and you know, really trying to capture. I also very deliberately didn't look anything up because I really wanted to just say, like, if I bought this game in like 99, 2000, what would my experience with it be like? And I think the thing and honestly, the most fun I probably had with the game was playing that fighting simulator. I think the fighting, the fighting being slightly better than I thought it was going to be, wound up being also, and just betrays my tendency towards like wanting to just play twitchy games all the time. Like that's pretty obvious why that was my favorite part. But yeah, I just didn't. And honestly, the tank controls is really what drove me up the wall more than anything. Was just swinging the camera around, constantly bumping into things, never feeling like I was truly in control of my character. And you know, I never liked tank controls, but at least in a game like Resident Evil, where it's like a lot of narrow corridors and stuff, it's at least kind of tailored to the way you move around. Having this big open explorable city, I was like, if this were analog controls, I probably would have had much less of a problem just kind of like putzing around and trying to figure stuff out. But the fact that getting around was so arduous really is kind of what made me put this thing down more than anything else.
I'm going to be honest, I kind of both agree and disagree with you at the same time for myself. Because the truth is, like, yes, the movement controllers were an absolute pain in the ass. So like, and I felt like if I didn't hold the run button down, I would never walk forward. I would always walk a step, stop, and then have to like press it 2 or 3 times. But that's not actually what turned me off from the game. What turned me off the game were the fighting game and the first person stuff. I honestly think that had it just been the adventure aspect, and because of how clunky, I would have been able to forgive the controls more, because there's less of like, move wrong and you die elements, and therefore it becomes a minor annoyance than like an actual hindrance. I got pretty far. The first one I played through was I only got to I did the supermarket shootout that happens right after police precinct. That ends with a hand-to-hand fight. But I literally, every mission I did, every time I fought something, every time I went somewhere and there was an option to die, I died in that playthrough. And every time I always got saved by, I didn't do the reincarnation thing. I always got saved by some dude who'd come in and like, oh, you're better now, walk away. And then you lose that mission, which I think in and of itself is an interesting mechanic that you could permanently lose and it goes on. Like I thought that was actually kind of cool. Then I left it for a while. We took a while to get this recording together, came back to it, and I played it with a walkthrough the second time around. And I realized just how much I missed the first time around without doing a walkthrough. Things like I ended up solving, small puzzles that I didn't know existed and have no clue how I would have figured that out in the first place, like drugging the second commander's coffee so that she falls asleep and you can get access to files.
A badge, right?
Yeah, to the badge, which I didn't even know I would need. The first time around, I didn't even know I needed that. Like I was unaware that was something that I had to do. But I also don't know how I would have continued the game had I not done it.
So as a kid, one of the things that made me feel brilliant was, did you all figure out the puzzle with the lizard in his apartment?
Yeah, I solved. I solved that the second time around. Did not the first time, nor again knew what I needed that thing.
Yeah, so as a kid, I remember you go up and you talk to him, and if you investigate the cage, it says like, oh, there's something shiny in this like lizard's cage. I wonder what that is. And then if you go to the kitchen, in the cupboard, there is like lizard food, basically. And I remember as a kid, I was like, wait, lizard food, lizard in the cage. Okay. So I like go back, use on, and he goes and retrieves a key for you. And then there's like a thought process where Kale is like, or your character is like, wow, Kale must have been really paranoid if he like trained his lizard to do this thing. And I was like, oh, exciting, paranoid. Oh, what's happening?
It's I want to talk about the story in a sec, 'cause I feel like that's probably the best part of this game for sure, which is like, saying something. But like I'll say, I basically got to the point where I think the end of what would have been the first thing, I got to the first boss, which is you go to the police precinct, you get to Commandant Gondar's lair after finding out that the entire police precinct are all demons, and he transforms into a giant, very like Elden Ring-esque boss. Like he falls, his demon form falls in the lava. A giant snake worm, ugly thing pops out, and then you're in first-person mode fighting this thing. And I was just getting fucking wrecked because you don't have good enough controls to get out of the way of his like multi-shot green fireball thing. And I was just like, no, that's when I was like, I wanted to at least get out of the city and onto the next area and meet David Bowie, but fuck it, not worth it. Couldn't keep going. Had to call it quits there.
They literally, with those first-person shooter parts, like you literally have to cheese them. Like it's not like, it's like cheesing is a part of the game because every character can shoot straight forward at you, but your gun is like to the right of your body. So you have to put your gun so that it's slightly to the right of what you're hiding behind and then just like spam them. That is basically how you have to get through most of the shooting battles because they didn't have cover, cover
mechanics.
Cover mechanics.
Yeah, cover mechanics. Yeah, so you basically just had to do that.
Can I say, I think the idea, and it's weird that you're saying that like what the studio asked for was like those first person parts. One of the many things that I found confusing and off-putting about this game was the scale of everything was so bonkers. Like the size on everything was so like way off from like what it should have been or what would have just made for a more pleasant gameplay experience. Like all of these locations were big and empty, like in like the worst ways. And I don't know why they even thought like engaging in a first person like arena with how they had like built out all of this was a smart idea at all. Like it was so confusing. Like the people felt so tiny most of the time, like compared to where I don't know. It was all wild.
Yeah. No, I think I noticed that too. In that everything felt just it was somebody's first time at 3D modeling, and everything just felt unrelated. And like the cars you got into were all just like maybe a fraction too small for the people getting into them. Chairs seemed desks seemed odd shaped. The weird stuff all around.
Yeah, it definitely contributes to what I think, something I admit I think was at least somewhat effective, Noah, that you and Pat touched on before, which is this idea of like, I am entering this place that is alien to me as a person clearly outside of it and like do not understand. And I will say, to the point where it almost gave me a little bit of real life anxiety walking around, where I was like, if I were in this situation, like I wouldn't know where to go. I wouldn't know what money is. I wouldn't know anyone and people wouldn't know me. Like all of that stuff, I think to a degree is effective, and I think making it as big, even if obviously that has some serious detrimental gameplay things to it. Like I think making it as feel as big and sprawling as it did, especially for the time, really contributes to that atmosphere. Again, it's basically everything about my feelings about this game outside of playing it are like mostly positive. I think it's really interesting design wise. I think it's as an evolutionary step, like this and like Shenmue kind of came out around the same time, and I feel like both were really trying to pioneer this idea of like open living worlds type gameplay, and like your choices matter, all that stuff that are now like common buzzwords in game design. Like all that stuff is having around the same time. Shenmue, also a game I don't like very much, and also a game that has a fighting element to it. But it's interesting. It's interesting to look at. I just wish it was basically any fun.
Playable?
I had like no fun.
That's like that. My ultimate problem with like, never mind any. I obviously didn't get far enough. I can't comment on like the story. I do think like the voice acting, particularly for the time, like that stuff was all fine. But every single choice that they made that was about gameplay or the user experience, even if for the time, if it was supposed to be experimental, like came off as like frustrating to the point of like almost unplayable in the for me in the user experience. The fonts were all truly deranged. It was like impossible to like take the time to read things. Their insistence on like using like different words because it's the future or whatever. Even just the basic, your inventory being called sneak was like, I was like, do anything else. Yeah. This is bad. This is dumb. And this is making things harder than it needs to be.
Something about like saying press Y to sneak and only for me to lift up my arm and look at it was very disconcerting.
It was really off-putting.
Yeah. Like all of it, every choice. And I get that it helped push things further along, but every single choice felt like it was designed to make you have a less pleasurable gaming experience.
Listen, man, your soul is trapped in another universe, and there are demons after you. It's not supposed to be pleasurable, Louis.
Well, so Pat, I want to talk about that part of the story and stuff, because this is the part that I thought was the most interesting and ambitious. But before we do, Louis, to your point on like weird decisions, one thing I want to throw in there, actually two things, were calling a slider, right? The calling a taxi function. The fact that you had to call a taxi, watch the taxi pull up, and you weren't automatically in it. So it took me 2 or 3 times to realize that you're not in the taxi moving to your location the first time you see it. You're watching the taxi get to you. You have to get in the taxi, then watch it go. So I kept being like, how do I keep calling the slider and end up in the same fucking spot I was already in over and over again?
Can I tell you something?
Fucking obnoxious.
I never figured out how to call a cab. I walked everywhere.
Oh, I really loved. So as a kid, I remember thinking like it was really cool that you had to get into the cab. That it wasn't like you just went to your next place. You had to like physically get in.
Once I figured that out, yeah, but I don't think they did a good job of cluing you in visually that that's the case. At first.
If you press a button at any point in time during that sequence, it cancels the whole thing. So then all of a sudden, the car shows up, and you're like, "Am I supposed to engage with it?" Because if I press anything, it stops doing the thing before.
The other like weird mechanic thing I wanted to bring up is like if you got something from a character, it didn't go into your inventory. It was in front of you and you had to pick it up, which was really annoying when I got this power rod, which is part of the story that you have to use to fight the demons. I do this thing. I talk to the enemy. I talk to this merchant who gives it to me. I walk away thinking he said he gave it to me. It's in my inventory. I get 15 minutes into the game to the point it says like, I need a power rod to do this. I'm like, fuck, I have to walk my ass all the way back to this merchant because they couldn't just hand it to me. I had to press A with it on the counter of the store to put it in my inventory. It's just like weird things that feel like common sense now that they did not.
You know when like you're in like a really bad like a job, right? Like where you're not incentivized to do more work because if you do more work, you're only creating more work like for yourself. Like doing a good job only puts more on your own plate. I feel entirely that way about Omikron as well, because even once you figured out how to put an item into your inventory, then you were tasked with having to figure out how to navigate that menu system of symbols, like as the next step. Like, where like none of it was ever making it easier for you, the player, to want to engage with the game. I can't stress enough like how, even in an attempt to do something different, how backwards all of it ended up becoming, like, by today's standards.
Yes.
Yeah. This very much felt like the equivalent to, honestly, very similar experience for me as Plock, where it was just a game full of interesting ideas that goes to more interesting places the further in you get, but whose primary gameplay loop is seemingly working against you wanting to get to those things. Right. It definitely had a similar experience there.
Well, let's talk about the ideas at play here. The storyline, at least as far as I got, and I think from there, kind of, you know, from what I understand, it sort of devolves into just like finish the mission kind of thing. But when you start the game, Kale, the character you end up inhabiting, is on the other side of the video game screen, telling you, the player, to inhabit his body because there's been a murder, there have been some issues, and only you can save Omikron. You do it, you land in the city, you are attacked by a demon that attempts to steal your soul. For whatever reason that is not very clear, it doesn't. You're still there. Nothing scares it off.
The mecha guard scares it off. It's about to absorb your soul, and the mecha guard.
But I feel like it stops before the mecha guard shows up. It's like it stops.
It's supposed to for sure because he says later the mecha guard saved my life. But it definitely, the way the scene is staged, is
the mecha
weird.
guard saved my life.
So as you go through, you meet your, I guess, girlfriend or wife. Which, Tro, you brought up a very interesting point to me before, of the fact that you you are somebody else in this body. But then to progress the game, you still sleep with your wife.
It's the grossest I've ever felt playing a game in a long time, because I told her when she asked me what was going on that I lost my memory, because I figured she wouldn't believe me if I said I was another person inhabiting the body. But then you sleep with her anyway. And I was like, well, I'm just some guy pretending to be your husband. She doesn't know it's not actually your husband. I don't know. It just started to get, the implications of that really got to me. And I was like, this is gross.
Well, I'm assuming then you never got to the strip clubs later in the city, which are also very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I did wander into some of them.
You call somebody in a shop who you could later inhabit her body. You call her yummy, which is very gross if you interact with her. But also, I don't know if either of you tried to do this, but if you try to get into the bed on the side that your wife is on, your character is like, oh, like I can't just jump on top of her. Yeah, that would be disgusting. Like, and then you go and get in on the other side and she jumps on top of you and you're like, well, this is fine now. I told her I was a video game player from another universe. It doesn't change anything. That's what I mean when I say like all of the elements as a kid where I was like fooled into thinking like, oh, I'm role playing. No, they're just. It doesn't matter. None of it matters.
So she doesn't respond any differently to that, or she believes you, or like what?
I think she like says that you're silly or something like that. Like she's just like, okay, are you not feeling well?
That's so interesting because as you progress, you find her at some point. She calls for help after you've kind of like started seeing some issues in the police precinct. She is on top of your apartment building, bloodied, and turns into a demon and attacks you.
Yep.
I think alluding to the fact that she is a demon all along.
Well,
and then
I guess that's okay then. That's consensual if both people are hiding who they are.
Yeah.
But
that is true.
But the idea is that because you then discover, talking to a mysterious stranger who I just didn't play far enough to figure out who that person was in the end, who lets you know that you were sucked into the game under false pretenses. The Kale that was there that brought you in wasn't Kale, it was a demon in disguise trying to suck your soul because the big bad wants wants to use this Omikron, use this active video game to suck people's souls into their dimension to make their demon god Astaroth more powerful.
Yeah, like, and to be able to get back into our world.
It's this it's this weird meta plot where you are playing you in this game.
Right.
Oh, did you notice that it always refers to you with the masculine pronouns too? I caught that and was like, oh, I mean, video games in the 90s.
All gamers were
I never
90s,
reincarnated as a woman to see that, but that's a fair point. Yeah. But
I just want to say, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I only want to say I'd bring that up because with the knowledge that she turns into a demon, I really thought that had I said I'm in a video game, that she would just, in retrospect, I thought she would just outright attack me because she would know. So, Tro, what were you saying?
Sorry, I had a reaction to you describing these plot elements that it feels like a bad spy movie where everyone is like double crossing each other and everyone's in some form of like deep cover. And that's always like at a certain point, that's always a plot point I don't like where it's just like, well, I was actually this thing though. And it's like, okay, I'm not getting invested in any character because all I'm doing is trying to like second guess everyone's motivations. And it just becomes like a cheap way to do a twist. So I think I would have gotten frustrated if I'd gotten far enough in the game to see that that's what the story was.
As opposed to the frustrating free experience that you had playing the game.
It would have been a different flavor of frustration. Yes.
Noah, did you beat the demon Tellus? Or did you die?
Yes. No. So when I first played, I beat it, but then I was actually recording B-roll for this because I was playing on a plane, and I had a save state so we can go back and capture key moments. And then I did die, and I got to see the reincarnation thing, which is I think another interesting aspect that I wish I did poorly enough on both my playthroughs to see more of this because it doesn't happen until a little later. So if you die early on, the guy just comes in and revives you. But if you die later down the line, you'll get reincarnated, though I think there are key moments where you just die.
Yes.
And that's
where Azeroth gets your soul. Yes.
Exactly. So there's all these different pieces there. And from what I understand, the reincarnation mechanic is interesting because like every character, there's like over 40 characters you can end up reincarnating, and they all have different skill sets and different abilities. So like it does become, as you die, you get to like restart a little bit elsewhere, though you also lose things like if you had built up the fighting skill in the training room, which apparently is a stat you can build and not just a practice room. Had no idea.
There are different fighting styles also. There's like 4 or 5 different fighting styles.
Right. So like so I wish I could have seen more of that to get into it. Again, great idea, but not worth me playing more of this game to uncover.
So every character you can die and reincarnate into somebody else at different moments, and basically it's like if you lose, instead of like really losing, you go into somebody else's body. There are also times when you can just find people like the girl that's in the shop that you call Yummy, which is very gross. You can do something called a reincarnation spell at a certain point and just inhabit their body. Which means you're just killing somebody and inhabiting their body and using it like a meat puppet until you're done with it. That I actually remember really messing me up as a kid because I was like, I just killed that person. Like, there's no kind way around this. But you not only have their skills, you have whatever they had in their pockets. So, like, there are people who have more sectets, the dollars or whatever. There are people who have different items. So by stealing their body, you also get their stuff. And sometimes it's an apartment key. Like, there are people with apartments that you can go back to.
Sorry, Patrick, you said pockets earlier, which I didn't understand. You meant sneak, right?
Sneak, yes. Things that they have in their sneak. I'm sorry. I should have, there's sneak.
Right. You should be more clear, like this game.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, no. And yeah, there's, I think, 40 characters. There's one in particular. So I don't know if as watching the long playthroughs, if anybody saw the part, there's a part where you have to get on something called a sham, which is like a rhinoceros, like a woolly rhinoceros. And as you try to get on it, it says like, oh, it's uncomfortable. It won't let you get on. And you're talking to a stable hand who is a different species. And he is very nice to you and is like, hey, like, yeah, you could borrow one of these. Like, you can go to this area, but I would never go because it's dangerous and I don't want to die. Like, that's like fully what the character says. Then your character, when you realize you can't get on as a human, you can walk over, drink poison out of a bowl, die, and take the stable boy's body, who just told you he's terrified of dying, just so you can ride this horse that doesn't trust humans. That is the entire purpose of him being there. That is the whole reason that you do it. And then you take his body and fucking just leave it for dead because you're done with that body. You don't need to ride that horse anymore. That's it.
Yikes. And then that rhinoceros turns out to be a demon in disguise and attacks you.
No, the rhinoceros, you walk like 40 feet with the rhinoceros, and then the rhinoceros pushes a boulder out of the way, and then you get off and walk in. Like, you could easily have walked there. You just needed to move the boulder. That's why you have to kill this person and take their body.
You can't just ask the stable boy to, like, I guess he's too afraid. Yeah.
He won't do it. He's afraid of dying, which, punchline, you kill him. So he should have been less afraid.
This is just a bonkers game. But I feel like this should fall into like 100 games to play before you die, just to experience how ridiculous this is. Even if you only play for maybe 15 minutes. Like,
maybe if someone remastered it with proper analog control, I would give it another shot. Like, if I could have just freely wandered around, like, without feeling like it was a pain in the ass, I don't know. It's tough to recommend to people because it's just so oppressive at the top in terms of getting into its mechanics.
It's hard. It's hard. But let's talk atmosphere a little bit, because I think another thing it does well. It's very easy to shit on this game. It is so easy to shit on this game. But I want to point out some of the things that were enjoyable about it. I think atmosphere, and I especially look at the music, and not just David Bowie's work on it, though I will say he went much harder on this than I feel like he had any business doing for something that could have been a throwaway.
Recorded even 10 just like original songs.
But are we going to say that that's better than just having access to his like canonical catalog? I get he made original material, but like, is that better than just like soundtracking the right moments with actual David Bowie songs?
Sure. I just needed Let's Dance across the whole thing.
Yeah. Would Let's Dance or Fame work anywhere in this environment they've created?
I think
Modern Love would just be like out of place.
I just think like much of this game, work was done, but not in the right direction. Making 10 original songs is okay, but I don't think that's like the end result is more confusing than I think satisfying. So I don't know, but.
Wow, you can only find it as a public playlist on Spotify, and it's only 8 of the 10 songs that they pulled from other David Bowie compilation albums.
Wow. Really?
Mm-hmm. So 2 of those are only our game exclusives. You have to play through the
game. Yeah, the last 2 songs of his in the game. But I was going to say also, like, I really enjoy just kind of the general soundscape of walking around the city or walking into. I didn't like it when the music got fast paced. When the music became like first-person shooter music, I felt was just like the most generic kind of shit that you would see in any game or sci-fi movie. But like the very slow, almost haunting kind of vibe of walking into even your own apartment felt a little creepy and a little off-putting. In a way, I think that worked for the game a lot. How did you guys feel when it just came down to walking around, as far as in the environment and everything?
I mean, I will say that like now with my 2023 vision, it's not as engrossing. But as a kid, like the cars moving around, the people walking on the street, you could interact with, like it had an environmental like hugeness that I thought was interesting. Like it felt like I was in a future city and could walk in almost any door. Like that was cool. Now I'm like, oof, man, like I can't always tell what's a door and what's a wall.
Oh, you can't at all. It's impossible.
Yep. But yeah, when I was a kid, it was really cool. Like I thought it was really neat.
Yeah, I have to put control stuff aside. I have to put respect on anything like pre GTA 3 that tries to pull off like a big living city type world where it's just like, because once GTA kind of got to that point, that sort of became the standard for a while, and that everyone else kind of just extrapolated from that. But this and Shenmue, which I mentioned before, like are really kind of operating in the wilderness sort of when it came to like, how do we build this? How do we make you interact with it? What are interesting things we can do to establish the world? And like I said, all my complaints about the tank controls were partially because I wanted to freely wander around and kind of poke around at this very bizarre alien world, because there was just there were so many things that even if maybe they were counterintuitive game design wise, they were still interesting to look at.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Like, I do think that sort of like what they presented, the kindest thing in like the time that I spent with the game that I think I can say is that like in presenting like a city that like obviously the world building was done and there was so much there, and then playing a cop that like doesn't have any of their memories, I was like, okay, on the base, this reminds me of Disco Elysium, a game that I will say is like a masterpiece. Probably like in my top 10 of like all time. And I was like, I like this, and it does sort of reward. I could definitely, I could understand how in playing it for the first time, it would feel, again, so expansive and open. In playing it when I did, it kind of left me cold in the same way that another game I didn't play when it first came out, but Knights of the Old Republic, it had a bit of that feel to it, where it's like there's a lot of space and there's not enough people for what it is that they're trying to do. But like I could see in playing it for like the first time when it was a thing how radical like that must have been. So
yeah, I feel like this kind of reminds me a little bit. We talked about this during the Ocarina of Time episode, if you guys remember that far back. The idea of some of these older, more polygonal games feeling very sandboxy in a like, oh, I just kind of want to like see what I can jump over or try to climb everything or see what's around every corner, in a way that newer games with more detail almost don't give you that same feeling. I think there's an element of that here. Maybe it's partially the drop distance, and so everything always kind of pops up only when it's 20 to 30 feet away and you're discovering something new every time, or just the general simpler shapes of like everything seems climbable, reachable, movable. I don't know. I think that in a way that works in its favor, and that I would love newer controls, but I'm not even sure that like newer graphics would help with that feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you just tried to modernize this game as it was built with like better graphics, it would just highlight the artificiality of kind of how small and actually narrow your ability to interact with this world actually is, as opposed to something that feels kind of more vague and open to interpretation. If you remade this game and you wanted to modernize it truly, you'd have to basically overhaul the whole thing. You wouldn't be able to just update the the graphics and stuff like that.
Right. Well, question. We talk about the idea of open space here. I would argue the two games at the top of the list right now, Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring, are also games with a lot of open space and not a lot of things or people. What is it to you guys that makes this feeling less egregious in those two games, or is it than a game like Omikron or Knights of the Old Republic?
I think for me specifically, it's that both Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild present within the narrative like a sort of
a reason for it.
Well, right. There is like a loneliness or like a bit of like isolation that I think is part of the narrative in a way that, I mean, it's always the problem until GTA sort of cracked that code, about doing a game in a city, right? Like instead of like in a bigger like a wilderness space where it's like, yeah, you can have people sparsely populated or, you know, only like here and there or whatever. And I mean, an Elden Ring kind of had its own set of rules and logic, you know, into like how that worked. There was no expectation for what it should be. But for something like this, that's like firmly in a city, if there's a full like police department, you know, like there were so much in terms of like what an infrastructure was ostensibly supposed to be here that it seemed like that there should have been more to it. And they did give more, but I think just not in the ways that actually feel, you know, like it was more of, for me.
Okay. Pat?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just like what makes a difference in terms of having a big space, and that's how you get around it. You know, with Breath of the Wild, like your traversal is like a major part of the gameplay, where like you're either climbing or gliding or skateboarding on your shield, or you know, doing all kinds of things to get around. Especially as you unlock, especially once you unlock like the bird power and get to like jump up the sides of cliffs and stuff like that. And then, you know, Elden Ring, you essentially have a horse that's basically a car that you can drive around. And if you ride fast enough, can basically ride past any enemy encounter, that if you want to get to a certain destination, as long as you know where you're going. But like, that's, you know, those things are reckon with the open space in a way that feels more like it more intentional. Whereas this was like, you can make an open space. So you did, but then you didn't really like,
You stopped there.
How to
it was
consider
like
that.
Just
yeah,
made
exactly.
open space. Done.
Yeah. I think that's part of the problem with especially as that was kind of when 3D graphics were starting to get more robust on PC and on Xbox and stuff like that with Knights of the Old Republic, where yeah, you could make these big spaces, so you did because it looked impressive. But then, you know, how do you get around it?
Yeah, and I don't know. I was thinking, like, as I was playing it, I almost feel like it would have been a better game if it had been like a 2D game where, you know, they just put sprites walking around and stuff like that. Could have made it look a little bit more crowded. Could have told a story that was similar, and you wouldn't have to worry about being like, oh, like, is it up? Is it down? Like, wire? Like, just like flatten everything out and then just make it so that you can move around. You could probably make it feel more populated and more alive.
Yeah. It also would have worked for a moment I ran into, which was precision platforming towards the end of my playthrough, which with those controls, it was just two jumps, and that was more than enough.
The jump is the worst part. Honestly, we were talking about the tank controls, but the jump is the worst part because it's one of those jumps. Few games do this anymore, but like I remember it was very popular with 3D games. Yeah, so you hit the button, there's like a step, then the jump, and then a step. And if you take this first step, like you push one button, all of this happens, and it takes 2 seconds to go through it. Right. If you push it and your first step goes off of the ledge, you're done. If you like... So yeah, like in real life, people don't just like...
I even hated that in Prince of Persia, which was basically the same style jump, and that was obnoxious then too.
Yeah, they've done it in a lot of those games, and it is truly insane how like they expect you to like aim it, and you're like, okay, well, I have like 6 inches to the ledge. That means I'll get the step in, then the jump, and then the ledge like gets thinner at one end, so I can't aim for that end. Like, you know.
Meanwhile, you're like doing this to line yourself up right before you get in there. Like,
yeah, you gotta.
Yeah, really sad I didn't get to that part.
You would have loved it.
Cried.
You would have had a great time.
You would have wept joy.
Probably would have.
But yeah, so they just like you're saying. Although I will say again, as a kid, I was pretty easily fooled. Like you can talk to people on the street, which I thought was really neat when I was little. Mm-hmm. And if you bump anybody, it's like the dialogue of like, oh, well, excuse me, pops up or something like that. Yeah, they felt a little bit more alive. I liked imagining that I was actually looking into the window of a world through a crude video game it's funny, interface.
While I was playing it, I always thought a lot about how like we would talk about the idea in like high school, right? About how like you always said that you'd really love a game that even if it was just like one like neighborhood block, but like the idea is that you could do whatever you wanted to inside of there. It wasn't a big world, but it was a world where with inside of that, like you could attempt to do like anything, and the game would just let you do it, right or wrong, good or bad. And I can see where like the seeds of something like that are, you know, the promise of that is inside of a game like Omikron.
Yeah. No, like people on their own schedules, people doing their own things. Like it's in there. It's just not realized. It hasn't been realized unless you played Thief Simulator.
Yeah. Is there like a graph scale here where like the amount of space in the game you have or the scope of the game versus what you can do with it? Is that like a straight diagonal line?
No, definitely not. And I mean, like, my thinking was definitely at certain points in time, like limited to what was possible, like from a computing standpoint. Like nowadays, I think you could probably make a pretty good big world. And as long as you've coded the physics and stuff like that really well, like the size of it doesn't matter as much. I mean, you'll have to use the same objects over and over again, or like a lot of that kind of stuff. You can't overpopulate with too many skins or whatnot. But yeah, no, they're definitely not directly correlated. But even then, like just the concept of like the embassy level in Mission Impossible or like Hitman games where it's like a certain scene that, but to a like extended to an entire neighborhood where everybody has all of their things that they're going to do on a set schedule. Even Dead Rising tried and like got close, you know, like because to the time aspect. I don't know.
Did Stardew Valley do it better than Dead Rising?
No. Stardew Valley is cool because it's complex and goes over a long period of time, and like people have their schedules. But to be fair, they don't really feel alive. They just like they feel they're a good enough facsimile where you're like, all right. But like Dead Rising did do a really good job in the sense that like if you didn't find somebody by a certain period of time, they would be dead. And it's because like they kind of at any point in time that you walked in, they were having the battle that they were going to have. They were going to die if you didn't show up to intervene. Like it was sort of scripted, but it also felt like it was happening, you know, in a way that some of these other games didn't.
Pat, did you ever play through Majora's Mask, which came out around the same time as this? Which is also that kind of like, you know, Clocktown is like a place where people are on, you know, as the days progress, they're on some kind of trajectory and will always do that. And then in that game, you're empowered to keep repeating that day so you can kind of memorize where everyone's going and what their kind of stories are. But that's, yeah, when you mentioned the neighborhood thing, that was like one of the first things I thought of. And it was another game playing with that kind of idea.
Loved Majora's Mask.
Yeah.
I feel like instead of like a binary, it's maybe more of like if you could get it on like a 2D plane, but like in like quadrants, right? Like there's like on one end there's like too small and too hyper specific where it's like the escapist, right? And then like on like one of the other diagonal ends you'd get like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, where it's like now you've overextended the space, but like also maximizing like all the things that you can do. Yeah, and then like there's two other sides to it as well that I think then like Goat Simulator maybe falls into everything. Hyper local but entirely free will.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm trying to think what is an example of absolutely massive, but only like two things you can do.
I mean, what was that? The space game that they retooled up as that one.
Yeah, No Man's Sky when it first released. Actually,
I say when it first came out.
Yeah.
Now there's a ton of stuff that you can do, but when it first came out, that is absolutely what it was. Yeah. You go to any planet ever and then just scan shit. Okay. Cool.
Let's dive into some of the nitty gritty on some of these mechanics. Right, the board game world uses the term 4X for the really big board games of like exploration. I forget what the other ones stand for. This is very much
that's three that you don't.
Yeah, because I want to get into actually talking about the game and not go on another tangent, which is a very easy thing to do with this podcast so far.
Fair.
This is a triple threat game, right? We have our like Monkey Island style, you know, search, adventure, talk to people, find items, use items aspect, our fighting game aspect, and our first person shooter game stuff. Not everyone really got through the first person stuff, though we all saw it. That all seems insane. The only thing I'll talk about is that like L&R to strafe, only one. I can even like fire and move around at the same time always. It was bad. The other two I think are a little more nuanced, though not great. some people, it sounds like they had a good experience with the fighting game aspect. I did not like it. I found that if I just mashed the punch button, I could beat most creatures easily.
I mean, if you beat the demon the first time when you were Kale, that's pretty impressive because that's one of the harder fights. So, good job.
What do you mean that the
Tellus turned
your
wife turned demon?
Yeah. I had the first time I played it, I had no trouble. Afterwards, I did, but the first time, I just I breezed through it by just just popping her in the head over and over again, and she eventually fell. I didn't feel like I didn't do anything else.
There's also an arena that you can go to and just fight progressively harder. That's an aspect that's off to the side.
That's where I would have ended up if I knew it existed. I had the, I only did the fighting through the training hologram that you can summon. I like the idea that there's a room in your house where you can summon a hologram to go beat the shit out of you. But that's because especially when you turn the difficulty up on that thing, it does not give a fuck. It runs in and just starts going all out. So I had some fun with that. And again, that's I'm not saying that game element was a blast to play, but it was the closest I came to having fun playing this game. Was kind of starting to play it just because there was a little bit more to it than I thought, and it actually was, considering how clunky the controls felt elsewhere. It was reasonably responsive, and just that's just in a game that's very much not my thing. That's the closest to being my thing was that element of it. So I think I responded positively to that.
All right.
Yeah, I liked the fighting game aspect, and I remember thinking of it fondly, as a kid. I thought it was doable, which I was not always very good at fighting games, so that was saying something.
Louis?
I mean, I thought it was interesting that it was in there. I think, particularly, to put myself back in that time, we were, I think, a lot more so programmed to be games are only one sort of thing, right? At any step of the way. So to be oh, okay, what I'm traversing this game it's Max Payne, and now all of a sudden it's Virtua Fighter is still not an appealing
but it's
elevator pitch to a game, but but surprising, and I guess interesting that it exists out there. So I don't know, it was fascinating that it was there. The item interaction and the sort of the satisfaction of sort of working through puzzles and understanding how Patrick was describing with the lizard and all of that. I can see and understand where there is an appeal and people might feel a positive response to doing any of these parts and playing a game as a game should be constructed to give you, but what was I getting them? No. Maybe was that just me refusing to want to have a good time with the game? Perhaps, but but I didn't really think the fighting was all that. I definitely didn't think that any of the ways that you had to manage items or work through the world were great. And it seems like the first person aspect was maybe the worst of all of it, which is saying something. So yeah.
Well, I also wonder, because as I mentioned in my sort of opening intro, that the first person aspect was something that was kind of asked for by Eidos Interactive. That wasn't a David Cage idea initially. So would this have just had two modes of game? Would this have just been fighting game and exploration had they not added that in?
Yeah, I really don't know. I can't imagine.
I think that maybe could have worked
in its favor
better if that was right. Right. You spend time focusing on just those two aspects, right? Instead of having to incorporate an entirely different thing.
Or maybe keep the shooting in this perspective you're already playing in. Why not just give you a reticle and an aim button and have you be able to start shooting people? I don't know. I also think that shift is confusing to me.
Yeah, and I look at something I think around, I want to say it's around the same time, I could be wrong. Did anyone ever play American McGee's Alice? The Alice in Wonderland computer game. It was very dark and...
Oh, I remember that being a thing, but
yeah,
I did not play it.
It's actually we'll have to do it sometime in the podcast because I don't remember how, I can't say how it holds up, but I remember enjoying it. It was a third person adventure / shooter. You jumped, it was definitely felt better to control than this. And I think that because there's a similarity in that the perspective, moving around the world feeling kind of open, even though that's a little more corridor-esque. You're still you're shrunken down in a garden fighting ants, and you're in a castle. There's still elements that are both open and closed there. And that never felt like this. That mechanic felt fine, and they could have adapted that style of play into this for combat, which as a third-person shooting, running around, being able to strafe, being able to dodge or entirely avoid being cheesed to death by just people popping out poorly. It was kind of amazing with all the resources and other stuff that did exist already in the world, that this was still as bad as it was. It controlled as awful as it did.
Yeah, this game has the feeling of, are you guys familiar with the term outsider art?
Yes.
The idea of art made by someone who doesn't normally participate in the medium, and kind of the differing perspectives and approaches. That's how this game feels to me. I don't know if David Cage played a lot of video games before this, and I'm not just saying that to slam the game. I think the idea of outsider art can be very interesting, like this game is. But I think part of what I found so frustrating in terms of all of its gameplay elements, even the fighting, which I probably liked the most, is it just had that feeling of someone who's not really fluent in the language of playing video games, trying out a bunch of ideas that they have anyway.
He worked on a bunch of video games.
Yeah,
right. Which is why
in your
it's
defense
strange
for that. In your defense of that, I'm not sure he played much games after this too. After having played Heavy Rain, I feel like he's not played video games. Period.
He was like, "Oh, you complained that there were too many gameplay elements in this, so I'll take those all out."
Heavy Rain. I felt very weird at the time because I felt like Heavy Rain was really celebrated by a lot of people. I hated Heavy Rain.
I think David Cage kind of pulled the wool over everyone's eyes with Heavy Rain, that then quickly got removed when he started putting other games out after that, and people were like, no, these actually are terrible and I
think it was getting rewarded in the same way that honestly this game didn't get great reviews, but didn't get poor reviews either. This game was somewhat rewarded too, and even won an award or two. I think it's the same thing as he got the credit for doing something different in a field that wasn't doing it twice. And then he went to the well the third time, and you realize, oh no, these are actually just shit games. There may be interesting experiences, but you're selling games. They are shit game. A movie where you don't play a single aspect of it is a shit game, even if it's a good movie, right? That's kind of the feeling here. Is I'm not going to this for a sit back, lean back experience. I'm going to this to be active, and if the active parts are what's not fun, then maybe it's just a really good movie and a bad game. You should rethink what career you're in.
What's interesting, though, is that, and I don't know, I guess I'd need some time to sort of sit with it and figure out, what, really the difference is. But, with this, particularly with Heavy Rain, versus something like Disco Elysium's not doing that much different from, particularly from, what Heavy Rain is offering. But I will say that it is vastly superior to it. As a video game, as a game playing experience, not even just in Disco Elysium's got an incredible story, or that, they had writers that wrote over 1 million words and blah, blah, blah. In the satisfaction, the core of actually playing it, and what it does, truly delivers something that I think is outstanding in a way that I think both Heavy Rain and Omikron feel very averse to, wanting to give people, and there's something in I don't know what it is, but
Disco Elysium doesn't have any QuickTime events. I feel like that might be one of the things that sets it above everything else.
Which is funny because you would think that maybe, I don't know, to a certain degree makes it further away from an idea of gameplay, because there isn't a lot that you do that feels particularly gamish about it, but it still feels better as a complete game. Neither of those, but I don't know. So there's definitely ways for that formula to work and be very good, and not just reward the difference in it happening and being this is good on its own. There can be good and bad within it. I don't know. But something I'll sit with, and I'll have more thoughts next time we get to another adventure game. Yeah, next time we have something like this on the docket, I'll have more fully formed thoughts on all of it.
So what's going to keep? I want to kind of go through and name an element here. What's going to keep you guys from fully tanking this game rating wise? What's the thing that's going to keep this afloat and not, in the Daydreaming Davy ET spot? Or is that where it's going to go for you?
Oh, I mean, for me, it would have to be having forgotten that I played the game to not give it a bad score.
For me,
I'd have to go back in time and not have interacted with it.
For me, it's definitely that it's going to the A for effort idea. It tried things, and I have to acknowledge and celebrate it for that.
Yeah, viewed as a piece of gaming history and kind of the evolution of game design is what I find most interesting about this game, and is probably what I will. Well, when you hear my final score, it won't sound like I'm rewarding it that much, but we'll give it a little bit of an edge over kind of what I would otherwise have just based my experience playing it as.
Fair enough. All right. Any final thoughts, moments, pieces of this, notes you've written down frantically while playing this game that you haven't got out? That, I mean, I'll say right now, one other extra piece that drove me nuts was there was a moment where in breaking into the police precinct, I had to find an electrical wire, which was probably the only thing that was to scale in this game. And that electrical wire was very small, and I spent about a half hour looking around the ground to see that it was just a black line how on earth were you supposed to know that it was a item you could pick up? And I think that sums up a lot of my experience with this game in a lot of ways.
So one question I had for you, Noah. So if you were using save states throughout the game, did you never interact with the save rings, the actual save points that they had?
No, I did in my first playthrough. I made sure to save. Okay. The second one is honestly because I wanted B-roll for the video version of this podcast, but also just I wanted to get a little further and move a little faster to have more to talk about. But no, I did in the first thing interact with the save rings.
Yeah, which, I mean, the same thing I'll say about every other element that they put into this game. Truly not helpful to me enjoying the experience at all, where they were.
Did you use the hints at all?
Every time I tried to, once I figured out advice was what that said on that screen.
Oh yeah, the weird font is hard to read. That's very fair.
Once I figured out that's what the word was, when I'd click on it, most of the time there wasn't anything there for me. Again, I did not get that far.
That's very funny.
Into it, but yeah, no. Okay, all right. I was just wondering if you engaged with that part.
Oh, and that's an in-game thing too, where they're only you can see these. It's your special soul from another dimension aspect that lets you see these.
Yeah,
things.
it's part of this. There's a reason for everything, because again, you are not playing a character; you are in the game. Even if you're also staring at your screen from in the real world.
But your soul is in the game. If you turn the game off and walk away, your soul is still there in purgatory until you finish the game. That's the concept.
I'm in purgatory forever, because that's not happening.
I can also tell you in playing that game that purgatory is kind to say that's where my soul was.
All right. What a bonkers game, guys. Let's go ahead. Let's dive in. Let's see where this lands on the list. If it's your first time listening, if it's your first time watching, this is how it works. My guest and I are going to assign a score to this game that we can only use once in perpetuity, meaning that we can't use any score we've used on a game previously. Every game has to be better or worse than something else. Once we see our aggregate score and where it lands in the list, we have one chance to change our score to get it to where we would like to see it. If it somehow lands above GoldenEye and we disagree with that, then obviously we're going to change our score to adjust that. But then if we can't move it, if we can't get it where we like after one change, then it is locked on the list forever, etched in stone, to be written in the history books in its place. Guys, Omikron the Nomad Soul. Patrick, you made us play this game. You're going to go first. What are you rating it?
I'm gonna give it my 4. I'm putting it right. It's a hair above Daydream and Davy, and it's below God of War for me. So yeah,
you're giving it a solid 4.
Yeah, it's my 4. It meant a lot to me. It was a big game for me. I know everybody else is gonna put it way lower, so I'm trying to just keep it a little bit above ET. That's my dream, but 4 is where it's at.
All right, Louis, what are you giving it?
I don't know. So I wrestled with like how to consider this game in an idea that like it obviously did things that were like important for things later on. And I think where I sort of ultimately landed was like in viewing comedy, right? Like there are certain things that do a lot to usher in other things, but then become very obsolete when you look back later on. Like it's really dope that Dane Cook was able to sell out Madison Square Garden, but Dane Cook is no longer, right, like a pillar of like what we should be aspiring to in comedy. You push certain things forward, but then you also sort of need to like discard and let them go. And
I kind of feel like he probably shouldn't have been a pillar to aspire to in comedy then either. But
yeah,
yes,
sure,
I get what you're getting for.
You know,
I think that's an indictment of the time more than anything.
Sure, but like also like really showed like what comedy could potentially do in a way where people did not think that maybe that was a thing before, and
that's
so
valid.
You know that has to be lauded. But that doesn't mean that you have to say that it's good, like you know then or now. And that's where I'm at with this game. I can appreciate what it did and what it took with the form, but I cannot say that any part of me enjoyed playing that game, and it was probably my least favorite gaming experience for what we've done here.
Wow. Okay.
Even E.T. was frustrating to a point where it's like, but like I could see what needed to happen, and I wanted to continue to try it in a way that like I cannot understand with Omikron. So I'm giving it a 1.5. And it is purely a mark of how much I felt like it was wasting my time.
Wow.
Damn, that's your lowest rating by far.
1.5. Hot damn. Yeah. That is nuts. Tro.
I'm going to go ahead and I'm trying to remember what scores I used and didn't use.
I'll let you know. I'll let you know. You're just looking at the main list and seeing where you want it to fall.
I'm trying to give it like a 3.5, essentially.
You have given it 3.5 to Nights into Dreams.
Then I'm going to give the... It falls into a similar category for me as Nights.
Dreamcast, baby.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to give this a 3.4. I'm going to put it slightly under Nights. It falls into the same category of like game that is... I feel like I could easily recommend someone try because it's so strange and you know, just you kind of have to see it. But also it's going to come with the caveat of this is not a fun thing to do with your time and you will probably bounce off it pretty hard. Which again, I know is a very controversial opinion amongst the gaming community who seem to love Nights. But I'm nostalgia blind about things too. So that's not an excuse. Yeah, that's where that falls for me. It's just, it gets 3.5 points or 3 and whatever 0.4 points just for the basis of all the interesting things it tries, but my experience playing it was not a positive one, so it goes no higher than that.
So I want to review this before I put my own in here for a second. So Louis, you gave this a 1.5, so you firmly on the main list here saying it falls right at the bottom.
Yes.
Just lands right there. Patrick, you went ahead, you gave this a solid 4. So if we're looking at how the list lays out, you know, it still puts it basically actually both of you in Tro. You're putting it between Daydreaming and Nights into Dreams. You still feel Nights into Dreams is better. Daydreaming is worse on this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna do what I actually thought I would do here, and throw this on at the highest of the group, but not by too much. I'm giving it a 4.8. I think the story and what it tried to do, as bonkers and ridiculous as it is, worked in its favor for me. I think as a whole, having revisited a lot of things recently, liked it more than I'd say my experience playing Aladdin or Plock, which was kind of like, meh. But at the same time, I did not want to finish this game. Like when I first started the game, my feelings were so much better. And when I last played the games, my feeling were so much worse. So I feel like I hit the emotions of my high and lows were so much wider than a lot of these games. And the reason why it's still so low, I mean, partially is because it's still falling into the bottom. What would this be? The bottom fourth, the bottom sixth of this list here for me. So I'm not rewarding by any means. But when I compare to other games in the list, I think, I would still keep Sonic above it, but I'm not sure Plock, Aladdin, probably like Nights into Dreams more, but Nights into Dreams is higher in my head. And so I have to figure out, do I like Nights into Dreams more than this, than I like Aladdin less than this? And I think that's not the case. So that's why I'm giving it that score. That being said, I'm not mad at where it ends up. I think it probably deserves this spot here. In the number 27 spot, Omikron for Dreamcast lands with a 3.425. The only one in the 3 range underneath Nights into Dreams and above Daydreamin' Davy. Even if that doesn't match up with what I was personally saying, I don't think I disagree with this either. And therefore, I'm okay with that. Guys, you got one chance. Do you want to try to knock it down further? Do you want to drop it below either of these other 2 games?
I'm good with where it is.
Yeah, no, I don't. I want to personally give it a low score because what I'm saying was I had a dog shit time with what I think is a dog shit game. But I really don't I didn't get far enough to engage with, I think, the elements that probably make it a thing that people consider favorable, and all of that. Also, I will admit my score for Daydreamin' Davy is very much of a sentimental kind and mark. So I'm not angling to say that
Daydreamin' is a better game.
Right.
Yeah.
I had I had some sort of first-hand knowledge of how Omikron worked, I probably would have scored it better. I'm fine with where it is. I just want everybody to know personally that I hated this game so much.
Do you believe that Hyperstone Heist is a better game than this?
Oh my god.
Don't make him choose.
It was like a Sophie's Choice if I hated both of my children.
You're like, can you just take both of them? I don't.
I have to choose one?
Can I be free of children? That'd be great.
Oh boy. You know what? Can we put a pin in that and I'll have an honest answer for you before we record but the next one because I need to give that some thought. Shooting from the hip, I don't have an answer for which one I think was better.
I mean, it looks like you do because here it is landing below Hyperstone Heist by a lot. I mean, we're grading off of the list that's already here, so this is what I feel like you're telling me.
I'll say this: at least the gameplay loop of Hyperstone Heist is not a mystery, and the buttons do things when you push them right away. that's essentially what I would put over this game.
That's a great point. I can clearly read the menus in Hyperstone Heist. Yeah, they're not telling me that their word for attack is jump or something equally confusing. Hyperstone Heist is a better game.
There you go.
You'll hear me say that once.
Louis' favorite beat 'em up, Hyperstone Heist. There it is. All right, guys, we're gonna lock this in. The list is closed, never to be written again until the next episode. Before we go into our closing bits and everything, Tro, I wanted to get thoughts on you. The episode right before this, I had the wonderful folks from RNG and T on, and we talked Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger. You and I have talked about this game a lot on our own. I want to get your thoughts of these landing at the, ironically, 6 and 7 spot. on the list here.
Let me just say, first of all, Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger are rated below Turtles in Time. I'm like actually incensed by that, and I like Turtles in Time.
Thank you. That's all I was trying to say the other time, was that Turtles in Time is rated insanely high.
I am like truly beside myself. I particularly Chrono Trigger. I cannot believe Chrono Trigger is rated as low as it is. I think that game, especially its original version, is like an unmitigated masterpiece. I think it was such a convergence of special talents coming together to make a game experience that deserves so much more than a 7.5, etc. I can see someone having a harder time with Final Fantasy VI, even though I love that game. Chrono Trigger, I'm mad. I'm going to be mad about that now.
Petro, I think you should take your 3 closest friends and go into a time machine and go back in time and fight to make Chrono Trigger.
Right.
Oh, wait, actually, that sounds like a better plot. I wonder what game has that. Oh, Turtles in Time.
Turtles in Time,
well,
right.
I guess that is a better game.
No, it's not even as good a time travel story as Chrono Trigger. Oh, God, fucking...
Wait, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We really should one time come into this with orange, blue, red, and purple on, because that would be just too perfect.
Just ready to go. We'll have to do a whole set of new Turtles games. We can't change this one. It's already in there.
Yeah. Anyway,
Maybe someone else can.
I don't know the folks who you recorded with. I'm not trying to denigrate anybody, but I am indignant about
Get out
its
of my
placement.
flame.
Dox them.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. That escalated.
No, none of that, please. But yes, thank you for sharing that with me, Noah. I needed my blood pressure to go up a little bit today.
I do what I can. I'm only here to make us all feel better in our own way, and I felt like this was just your turn. Guys, thank you all for watching. Where can the people, the fans, the best, the B-goaters can find you guys? I don't know. I'll come up with something. Find you guys.
I like B-goaters. That's good.
I mean, I'm at Patrick BC Molloy on Instagram and Twitter, and because I always forget to think about it, you should check out Michael Petrocelli and I on Replay Values. We have Lewie on. We'll have Noah on soon. Got some old episodes coming out soon from 2019.
Yeah.
So
You can hear the freshness of our pre-pandemic voices. The only social media presence I have right now is my Mastodon account, which is at Trocelli at toot.community. That's the server instance I'm on with Mastodon. It's a little weird to sign up for, but then once you're in, it doesn't matter what server instance you're on. You can just search for people by their handle, just at Tro_Celli, and you'll find me.
Hey, if you want to say nice things to me or know that I'll maybe take a look at what you're saying, you can find me on Instagram at Naked Pictures of Louis Thomas. If you've got nothing but venom and hate in your heart and you want to scrap in a wasteland, then find me on Twitter at Drunky Looster. I've got time there to mix it up. So. But only come there if you really want these, digital hands. So.
What a wild romp. That was a lot. It's so rare we do just a single game on this podcast, but when we do, it means something. And I think, look, this may not be the best game. It's not even that highly rated of a game for this group. But it's going to be interesting. And that's exactly what this was. Interesting. I had a blast talking about this game. I started off having a blast playing it. Didn't end up that way, but there it is, locked in on the list. Glad we got to talk about it. One thing I didn't talk about, and I kind of want to talk about it here a little bit, is I have a weird connection actually with David Bowie. This is going to be a little bit of a flex, so bear with me here. In Bowie's early stages of his career, he would hit some of the clubs in New York City, and he would videotape them, so you can watch it back and see how he's doing. And you can find a lot of these early Bowie clips where like the footage is all washed out. It's far too bright. It's all in his dingy club. He's still kind of rocking his Ziggy Stardust look. And the man behind the camera is none other than my father, Bruce Waterman. My dad was David Bowie's his first like early cameraman. He used to record his performances so that Bowie could watch it back, see how he did. Obviously, Bowie's stage presence is such a big part of his persona, and it's kind of cool to think that my dad had a part of that. Apparently, according to my dad, he got the job because he didn't care that it was David Bowie. That he kind of like shrugged his shoulders and was just like, "Are you going to pay me? All right, then I'll do it." So yeah, so I don't know. I saw not as a general fan of Bowie's of a lot of his work. That's just always kind of cool to have that sort of less than 7 degrees of separation connection to the man, the myth, the legend, Bowie. But that does wrap up this episode. Before we do, we're gonna just pop into a light and easy one here. What is your favorite instance of a musical artist being in a video game? I'll say, easy one right off the bat for me, Def Jam Vendetta. Def Jam Vendetta, 100%. I think, specifically Fight for New York, but I think the use of the various artists, both well-known and some, I say lesser known if you weren't as big into the genre, if it was just their music and their likeness, Diano, it would be enough. But the fact that the gameplay was good, and like really good, and like no one's really hit on that perfect mesh the way that game is, really blows it out of the water. That's for me. I would love to hear from you guys. What is your favorite instance of a musical artist being in a game? Please be sure to let me know in a review of this podcast in your favorite podcast network, or on the comments of the YouTube video if you're watching this on YouTube. And while you're there, while you're on either of those platforms, I suggest you be sure to like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, be sure to give it a follow on whatever your favorite podcast app is so you don't miss another episode, because the next one after this, it's the same guys you know and love, Lewie, Pat, and Petro, coming together, and we're going to play every mainline Mario Kart game. You heard me. Right now, probably still the hottest seller in the Switch store to date, Mario Kart 8. We are going to go back throughout its entire history. I'm talking Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, DS, 3DS, Wii, and Switch. I did go out of order, but I did not miss one. 8 games, 8 Mario Kart games. We compare them to each other and see where they all land on the list. Guys, we're surpassing 30, going far beyond 30, far beyond 35 at this point. We are knocking a bunch of games out, and you are not going to want to miss this extravaganza, this Indy 5000, not 500, 5,000 of a race. I think it's going to be nuts. I think you're going to love it. Who doesn't love Mario Kart? It's an absolute classic, but does it belong at the top? There's only one way to find out. Tune in next month and join us. And until then, stay cool, stay hip, and stay heavy.
The Best Game of All Time is an independent production, hosted, produced, and edited by Noah Waterman. Theme music by Peter Rowland. If you want to learn more, go visit www.thekaijulounge.com.